Welcome, dear established viewers, to Richard and Karl presents Deep Space and Dragons. I'm Richard, the first and only.
And I have been established to be Karl, but only by my voice.
It would be kind of amusing if I just got a different Karl every week and no one's noticed. Like, I just go to the bus stop with $20. Hey, I need a Karl. Anyone want to make...
Yeah, and then you just install the voice changer and they always just sound like me. It's perfect.
Oh, a voice changer. Yeah, that would have been much easier. So, what's new in the Karlverse?
Well, I mean, I kind of spoiled it a little bit yesterday when I messaged you about how Aliens area can't possibly live up to Parasyte.
Yeah, I did kind of piece that together, but we'll give a recap on here. Also, for anyone reading Weekly Show and Jump, who has recently read Alien Area, read Parasyte. It's just better.
I mean, it's too bad that it's not on Shonen Jump. But, I mean, I just kind of have this, rant about how, so, a while back, you had this idea where you were going to write me a weekly series, and you asked me for ideas. And I was like, you should write me a horror story. And you're like, what? You've never even read a horror story.
I stand by it.
Well, I don't know. Horror or not horror, Claymore.
Not horror. It's fantasy
Not
like
horror?
everything.
Well, okay, so Promised Neverland also probably not horror.
That one's on the fence. I might give you that one.
I mean, okay, so Bleach definitely not horror, but it had some pretty horrifying elements, like Captain Freak Show.
I'm going to say the ending of Bleach was horror for different reasons. Alright, so The Promised Neverland is dark fantasy, science fiction, and thriller. These are easily Googleable things.
Yeah, okay, but I mean, okay, so maybe I just don't know what makes a horror story, because, I mean, what makes Parasyte a horror story, because that's definitely a horror story, 100%.
Let's find out. So, using my power of the internet, Parasyte is body horror, thriller, and science fiction.
Okay, body horror, that makes sense, I guess. But then why isn't Claymore also body horror?
Let's find out. Claymore. Claymore. Manga. Because you have to Google the manga to get the genres for some reason. The animes don't give you the nice little genre list at the end, thanks to using magic search. Dark fantasy, sword and sorcery. So somehow Claymore is actually in the same genres as my own novel, except I also have a comedy in there because I'm sassy. Actually, I did just write Claymore with 90% more sass, didn't I?
Kind of.
I mean, I'm fine with that, but...
So, Jujutsu Kaisen, you wouldn't say that's a horror story either?
Not the way I was conditioned by movie theaters. So, my problem with when you described horror is my brain went to the things that are released as horror movies in movie theaters. So that gave me things like, oh, you want me to write Saw, or Hannibal, or Evil Clowns? And I'm like, why are you asking me for this? Because Jujutsu Kaisen is dark fantasy, supernatural, and adventure. Yeah, and if you asked me for a dark fantasy, a supernatural, or an adventure, that's my jam. You ask me to write you Saw, or Final Destination, or The Haunting on House Hill, I don't know how to do that. I could, because I'm awesome, but I'd have to charge you.
Is Tokyo Ghoul also considered horror? Or, wait, I guess, is that a horror?
Let's find out. This may end up being our topic of the episode if we never actually get to it, is what's in a genre. Tokyo Ghoul is horror. Dark fantasy and thriller. However, for Tokyo Ghoul, did you manga Tokyo Ghoul or anime it?
Well, see, I was actually going to make a comment about how I have this hankering for horror stories, or what I perceive to be horror stories, which is apparently just dark fantasy.
I think want to make this our episode topic, where we just dive into all the dark things that you thought were horror and discuss what they really were. Because I'm ready to give this 7-minute speech on Tokyo Ghoul, but we will have to put our Boruto episode off for another day. Your call.
Well, I mean, if you're interested in the topic, I mean, we can definitely go ahead. But I guess before we begin that, then I should ask you what's new with you, because what's new with me is I've spent like the past week reading a variety of apparently dark fantasy novels.
Nice. So yeah, we're definitely going to do dark fantasy brackets. What even is horror? That's going to be the episode title. So here's what's new with me. I'm writing a new novel. I did a Fire Emblem stream, which was awesome, where we basically played Fire Emblem and started shipping characters like you do for Fire Emblem Three Houses. Shipping characters is one of my favorite things to do in this world. And I also volunteered at the Sheridan graduation convocation ceremony. So they didn't have anyone graduate and get the big to-do from 2020, 2021, and 2022. So they held like 3 weeks of graduation ceremonies in this massive airport hall. And it was just gorgeous. And here's the thing. So a lot of these kids who got voluntold to do this, because we volunteered brackets, but we're also salaried employees that were highly encouraged to go volunteer there as part of our salary hours.
Right.
So we get like the 19 and 20-year-olds being like, oh, I have to stand, it's so hard. I was literally dancing. My job being to stand in front of the staff robing area and redirect people to the student robing area, and being paid to do that with a free snack bar with sandwiches and muffins and coffee in between doing these things, and to tell people, hey, you're late for your own grad, don't walk, run. That was a fantastic 6 hours. I loved it. Because, like, I'm so used to doing actual work. So it's like, oh, this is great, yeah. Down the hall to the left, run, don't walk. You're already graduating and you were half an hour late. You may want to hurry. Dude, you don't go in this room. Dude, you go into that room. Like, I wish I had, like, the arrow to throw up and spin. And then between the grads, it's like, then I just chat with people and eat food. I'm like, this is fantastic. I am loving this.
Yeah, convocations are actually pretty, I mean, the actual convocation process is really long and boring, but there's lots of fun stuff about it, too, so.
Yeah, so there's, like, the whole put on the robe, march down the hallway, walk across the stage, grab a piece of paper, could not care less. A giant reception hall full of high-energy people who have achieved their dreams, that's a good place to be. I can get behind that. So I did successfully go do that, but that was pretty much my week, is work on my book, stream Fire Emblem, play the demo of the new Fire Emblem, volunteer at grad. I had a couple tutor sessions, help people work on their projects, and yeah, that's pretty much it. I managed to be simultaneously super busy and not actually that busy. It's like a weird quantum state.
Well, I mean, that kind of just seems to be your life right now, living that professional student life.
Loving it. Oh yeah, and also my brother's birthday happened, so I went on a hike to get him ice cream.
Oh. I mean, his birthday isn't as important to me as your birthday, but I'm sad that I missed the day.
I mean, it's June 10th,
happy birthday.
So you could very easily be like, happy birthday, here's $1 for each year you've been alive. And that would just be the best thing that ever happened to him. Because he is also a broke student.
How old is he?
34?
Huh. For some reason, I thought he was older, even more older than me, I guess.
Yeah, no. Yeah. Just that intense card gaming lifestyle super aged him.
Quite possibly.
But savage sass aside, yeah, I feel like dark fantasy and horror is a great topic to go into. Alright, so Tokyo Ghoul. Tokyo Ghoul is an adventure, because the manga is very consistent and good. I've done the entire Tokyo Ghoul manga. How about you?
Well, see, I was reading it when I got up to the part
where he gets stabbed in his stupid face.
No, they do the assault on the Ghoul facility, and like Kaneki is getting like tortured and goes crazy or whatever.
Like you do.
And I was like, okay, this is like a thrilling horror story. And then I feel like there's 20 chapters where it just decided not to be a horror story anymore.
So that was going to be my next speech I was going to give, which is perfect. So the first season of Tokyo Ghoul, I would say, deserves the genre of horror. He went on a date, got surgery, slowly turning into a monster. When he eats food, it tastes terrible. He has the desire to kill people, and he's being hit on by what is effectively a combination of fashion designer stereotypes who has fallen in love with him to eat him. Yeah, it's a horror. But then after he gets the like finger breaking gray anime hair, it goes into being show and jump. And then there's literally he gets stabbed in his face. There's a time skip, and now he's a ghoul investigator, and it's being all like they completely lost their own tone. And it's much more pronounced in the anime, because the first season was a nice, slow, methodic horror. And they did it the really well way of, he has his cafe, you're learning the lore, it's nice and subtle, and then murder spikes start shooting at people. Because it's still anime, so there's always going to be at least like 20% fantasy, you just can't help it, it's part of the genre.
Right.
But it was the pacing, and the drama, and the fact that even though he had like ghoul powers, it was still like, oh, things could happen at any moment, people are crazy, they want to torture and eat him, it's rough. But then they have his time skip, and he's like, yeah, I'm half ghoul, half investigator, part of the investigator corps. And then it just kind of goes off the rails, and the anime imploded. They tried to adapt all of it in like one 12-episode season, and it just died. So like, the first season was good, the second season they Full Metal Alchemist it, and just made up a season. And then the third season was just a horror, it was unwatchably rushed.
Unwatchably rushed.
It gets an incomplete. I didn't finish it.
Yeah, okay.
That's a stamp of horror. For the wrong reasons. So, to loop into when you initially proposed, hey, can you write me horror? My brain didn't go Tokyo Ghoul. Like I said, it went poltergeist or slasher fix. So either like going through a house with a shaky cam Blair Witch Project, or psychotic torture porn for some reason. So I didn't go nuanced and I didn't go suspense. I went straight horror. As how movie theaters tend to like. How often do you see movie theaters come up with something that's suspensed and nuanced rather than we'll throw gore at you, or it's just ghost with a shaky cam?
Well, so I don't usually watch that much horror, but the most recent horror movie that I remember watching that I would classify as horror was a movie called The Witch, which was praised for being one of the most historically accurate horror movies ever made. I think it came out in 2017 or 2018. But it was a timepiece, and this family gets kicked out of their home for being heretics. And then they accidentally set up their new homestead on the edge of a forest where there's a witch that slowly tortures them until they turn their daughter into a witch.
But you see, if it was anime, it'd be 24% people having magic swords and fighting the witch.
Yeah.
So, to follow that train of thought, what genres would you put Attack on Titan?
Ooh.
Before it went all weird and Nazi after the time skip. We don't talk about Nazi Attack on Titan. Where they literally... No, we're going to talk about that for a minute. Who decided and let it hit print when they literally put Stars of Davids on their characters with German blimps talking about the chosen people? Who signed off on that? And then be like, you know what? Maybe we shouldn't be pro-Nazi. Ugh. Like, they're like, well, maybe the Nazis have a point. It's not a thing. Also, for the record, I am quoting a series. I do not think the Nazis had a point. They were the villains. We agreed on this. It's one of like 3 times in history we all agreed on something. It's right up there with the alchemist who fused his daughter with the dog.
Yeah, that was pretty...
That guy was evil. People weren't defending Shao Tucker.
No, they were not.
They're like, well, he kind of makes a point. Like, losing his grants would have really sucked. No. Anyway, Attack on Titan. What? I'll guess the genres and I'll tell you, because this seems like a fun game for this stream.
Ooh. Well, okay. Well, I mean, it's obviously action fantasy. Because all
we got action and we got dark fantasy.
Okay, dark. Okay. See, everything that's dark fantasy, I could like. It's not necessarily that it's horrifying, but it has a lot of the elements of what I consider horror.
And I think that's the issue. Is I think your horror is actually just dark fantasy, because the parts you described that you liked about The Witch were about the setting, the themes, the feel of it, and it wasn't the person jumping out and spooking you. That was what you found interesting about it. It was the the gothic aesthetic, as it were.
Yeah.
Because Attack on Titan, when they did a live action one, they pivoted to horror.
Yeah? It had more Titans like jumping out and eating people and
Yeah,
stuff?
because the premise of Attack on Titan, if you get rid of the do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do and the jetpacks, it's just giant monsters breaking down and trying to murder you as they eat your family in front of you.
Right.
And the series got nuts and completely lost what it was focused on. But another season, I would have probably given season 1. Someone could make a pretty strong argument it was horror.
Yeah, okay.
All right, so
because then like the main character goes through what would be described as body horror, where he becomes a Titan, right? Like,
well, I think more of that's like you see the Titan kick down the wall, and you literally see the terrified scouts trembling on the rooftop as giant hands crush them to death. Like, there's a scene where where Armin just watches Eren get grabbed by a Titan and like eaten.
yeah.
Like, that is legitimately horrifying. Because honestly,
that is dark fantasy, not horror.
Yeah. And to go up to the next category of Claymore. Claymore is dark fantasy and sword and sorcery. So when they say sword and sorcery, they mean the serious D&D campaigns. Sword and sorcery as a genre, you think would mean I have swords and I fight sorcerers. But what it really means is, I'm in one of those gritty fantasy settings where we don't have toilets. Where we actually have to track our food in our inventory.
Right.
Like, sword and sorcery to me means I'm running D&D on the hardcore mode, and everyone's character comes from a broken home, and the happy character is the first person who will die. Like, Berserk is the staple dark fantasy manga. Dark fantasy is Berserk.
Yeah, okay. I guess I've just maybe my entire life I've just been confusing dark fantasy with horror.
Well, it might be that I'm just mistaking, because it could be that I'm mistaking slasher flick and terrible live-action ghost movie for horror. I might be mistaking suspense for horror. Like, it might be we're meeting in the middle and just kind of missing on this. Because, yeah, if you asked me to write you Claymore every week, I would just take the quips out of my manga, or make anyone who makes a quip get horribly murdered, and I would make it unfair. So, in my current novel, it's relatively fair. If you have 6 knights, you can take down 1 sorcerer. That's pretty much the math. So,
right.
If my characters are cunning, smart, and play their cards right, none of the fights are so unfair that it's nihilistic. Dark fantasy, the fights are supposed to be nihilistic. There is no amount of winning Guts can do to actually win his way through that setting. It's just not happening. Life is just rigged against him from birth. As he has the most D&D fighter backstory ever made. And I'm not going to lie, I have about 4 builds for Guts on my phone, because that is the easiest character to roleplay in anything. I gave them the Haunted One background. They're raised an orphan. They have a great sword, are a champion with great weapon mastery, and heavy plate armor, and invested entirely in attack and con. And charisma and intelligence are their dump stat, but they have decent wisdom. Boom. The most generic and really good fighter class. Variant human to start with great weapon master. Yeah, I'm level 1 and I hit you for 20 damage. I just cut that thing in half. But my problem is I'm just so edgy and can't trust people. Why is no one coming over to ask about my cool backstory?
Well, maybe because it takes like 15 volumes.
His backstory is a larger campaign than the campaign, yes. So
like
I would say there's parts of Berserk that are horror, though. Particularly the Eclipse. That was just horror.
Yeah, that was terrifyingly like.
And I would say that
grotesque.
Season 1 of Berserk was actually horror. So you have him meeting these knights, being like, okay, I'm a mercenary, and then just demons ripping his friends apart, his arm being chopped off, Griff getting his skin flayed and then betraying them. Which, to be fair, getting your muscles all removed would also make you... Like, Griff might have one of the most justified backstabs in history. So, Berserk, especially when your eyeball-covered, mouth-covered necklace starts screaming as the moon turns red, that was some horror. You done dying over there, friend?
Sorry, I have a bit of a cold.
Apparently, as you're destroying our podcast with dying, I expect more professionalism from you. How dare you have bodily functions? But my backsass aside, let's pivot to talking about Claymore. So Claymore, I really enjoyed it up until they pulled an Attack on Titan and tried to explain things. One thing I think that instantly turns your horror into dark fantasy and then into action adventure is when you explain what's happening. Because a large part of keeping things spooky is not knowing. And I find a lot of these series drop the ball when they actually try and over-explain what's happening. In Claymore, we have monsters, and we take monster parts and plant them in women, and they become monster killers. Mm-hmm. But the moment you start being like, actually, this whole thing is this, and it's part of this, and we're doing it for this reason, all your suspense is gone. All of it. You threw it out the door.
But that's definitely part of what makes the... well, that's probably part of why I keep confusing dark fantasy for horror, is because they always have these super mysterious... and then probably the best word to describe is grotesque. First seasons. And then they kind of go back and they explain it, and suddenly it's like, well, I kind of liked the air of mystery and the fact that it's like you didn't know what, like, pivoting back to Tokyo Ghoul. The first season he gets tortured, and then it like has its kind of conclusion, and then they step back and they start focusing on the human characters, and they start explaining how each Kagune or whatever has a type,
and they straight up Pokemon logic it.
Yeah, rock paper scissors, and it's like, I don't need a rock paper scissors. Like, I don't need a hard magic system in my horror story. I want mystery and
like
danger.
I had that direct conversation. So the Werewolf Project I've been helping someone work with is they wanted to move from being a YA novel to being a more gothic, serious, dark fantasy, borderline horror. And one of my best advice I keep giving is you can't explain it. You can't just have someone be like, I use the moonslaying sword and encrust it with my blood to use blades of blood attack. If that's the series you want to write, I can write that and do that really well. Someone commissions me to write a better Inuyasha. That is the best money anyone's ever spent. I will crush it. Someone tells me you want me to write a better Claymore? That's going to be a lot harder. Because...
oddly enough...
Yeah.
Inuyasha is definitely one of those series that I wouldn't consider horror.
But it could have been.
Probably because it's not grotesque enough. And also it has, like, it feels like it has internal logic still, somehow.
So I think with Inuyasha, which I've recently binged the first couple seasons of and the last seasons of, I would say the first few episodes, when Inuyasha was still morally ambiguous, and it was like, this is a crow, eats a gem, flies out of someone's chest, oh, this person's using their hair to strangle a village. The series had a different feel to it and a different tone. But once they added in Shippo, Moroku, and Sango and had your band of 4 adventuring party, the quip percentage went up nearly 1,000%. Because now whenever Inuyasha did something evil or villainous or whatever, he got quipped to death by the quipping squad. So
okay, I definitely see that. There's definitely the first few episodes were a lot more dark and serious, and then the characters and writing really lightened up.
Like even the first few episodes of Shishomaru, this is before he has like his cliche anime band of protagonists, is his brother shows up with an army of the dead, taunts him with the faceless zombie of his mother, and rips out his eye to loot his father's grave. That was dark fantasy. Then, but the moment you put a chippy mascot character in to make puns, the moment you have Moroku hitting on women every second episode and Sango hitting her with the anime cliche fan, and people making fun of your two romantic leads for their obvious romance they got going on, it changed from dark fantasy to light fantasy. Because really it's more about tone than actual setting and plot. Because you definitely could do Inuyasha as a dark fantasy. You would have just had to keep Inuyasha being an actual threat. And then Kagome is just traveling with the psychopath that wants to kill and eat him, but is also kind of hot. Is actually like a more This is a weird take, but Inuyasha would have been a much stronger series, in my opinion, if they had cut everyone except Inuyasha and Kagome. So she would have to do a fair amount of the heavy lifting. And Inuyasha could actually just be a psycho monster that kind of cared. Because that was the thing, is like, well, I kind of care, but people bullied me and are monsters. But Season 1 Inuyasha had no problem just murdering some people. None at all whatsoever. Lost no sweat over killing a village. So
yeah, that's true.
So you definitely could do that. Also, they did the whole Naraku. It wasn't quite as bad as Aizen, but it's like, yeah, this one villain caused everything bad that ever happened ever. It's like, actually, this was much more compelling than Inuyasha straight up got betrayed by the love of his life because he was a demon. It was more compelling. But to pivot back to Claymore, Claymore was great.
Right.
Did you actually finish Claymore?
It's been a really long time.
Because it came out in 2001.
There seems to be a trend with horror stories, like Jujutsu Kaisen, Tokyo Ghoul, Claymore. Maybe it's an anime trope in general, but a lot of them will have a time skip, and after the time skip, they just decide they don't want to be a horror story anymore.
And I think part of that is maintaining the overall arching plot. So let's take Deathnote. Deathnote was not horror. It was not even dark fantasy. Deathnote was thriller, though. Because it was all about the who dies when instantly in a horrible way. Like, it was a dark tone series. But what happens is...
I definitely would not classify that as horror. I mean, it was, like you say, it was dark, but it wasn't horror. But anyways, go ahead.
So it was edgy, it was not horror. But it had the same problem that when you have your game of cat and mouse, that's where a lot of intensity comes with these stories. And let's take, like, the early seasons of Claymore, for example, is she was after the monster that murdered her family that made her become a Claymore. And then, once they actually fleshed out this enemy, as it were, the tension disappeared completely. Deathnote had that problem when they killed off L and Light won the first round, because, like, that's it, the suspense is gone. We're watching this one level of... You undercut your own suspense. Attack on Titan, when it was revealed, oh yeah, actually we're just an island where we exile a metaphor for oppressed minorities by the Nazis. You're like, no, this was more compelling when the world was just post-apocalyptic and there was just giant monsters out there trying to kill us.
Just as another interesting side note...
Claymore went its whole run without any Nazis?
Well, I'm a little bit intrigued by the fact that it's like more than one series has been like, oh, actually the monsters are on this island for some sort of secret research, and I wonder if the second half had done better, if there would have been Nazis in Claymore.
They pretty much could have been, because Claymore took that first step of, okay, we're going to explain this skeezy council of people making super weapons that... Actually, this whole island is us trying to make weapons to kill the outside world as sequel bait. There's no reason it wasn't Nazis. Claymore and Attack on Titan could have been on the same world. Because we never actually explored what was actually out there after they declared there was a thing out there. Which, I mean, that crossover would have probably saved both franchises, amusingly.
Claymores versus Titans? Oh.
Right? So, like... Claymore wasn't interesting because it was literally like, okay, we did Berserk, but we switched the gender of the protagonist, and much like my own novel, it felt like they rolled a dice. They didn't write the characters in Claymore as women. The fact they were female wasn't important.
Right.
Which is how you write your female characters. Yeah. She never had a romantic subplot in that entire thing. It's shocking. I mean, also her front of her body was stitched up in horrifying scars that never healed. But still, no romantic subplot. I don't even care what excuse you need to give me. Good job.
But...
Alright, so
but
what...
yeah, Claymore was definitely a great series. It's just... Again, like the time skip, and so many series, they just change tone when they go for that second half because they lost their forward momentum, I guess.
And none of them are quite willing to commit as much as JoJo's. So, JoJo's changes genre every season. And I'm pretty comfortable that Part 4 of JoJo's was a horror.
Part 4 was...
Looking for the serial killer in the town?
Yeah. That was definitely a horror.
And you can argue that Part 1 was dark fantasy straight up. You killed a vampire with a sword in Gothic England.
Yeah, but I mean, isn't that like the staple of the classic horror like genre?
So
like the original.
Like they literally had Jack the
genre?
Ripper? I think if he didn't punch people with super martial arts powered by light, he probably could have got away with it.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
Like,
it,
you could-
it lightened it up a bit from horror, but it definitely took a lot of notes from.
And then
classic.
part 2 stopped being horror completely. It just went straight adventure manga.
Mm-hmm.
And then part 3 was Bro Trip. Just road trip series. It was a Bro Venture. Bro Venture? Yeah, coining that. Bro Venture.
Bro Venture.
But yeah, so JoJo's, you can't even genre JoJo's, but a lot of these series would do better if they committed to that. Because the reason JoJo's gets away with it is they're fine actually killing off their Naruto Uzumaki and actually letting the show be about Boruto.
Mm-hmm.
They're completely fine with, hey, we'll let these characters still exist because it's a shared world, but also maybe other things are happening, and that makes it less jarring. Because if Attack on Titan did its whole thing, they did their whole thing, and then they followed new characters, but never paid it off because it was still about the main 3 characters.
Right.
So they introduced a bunch of characters with a time skip, but weren't willing to take the existing characters off the board. And you'll notice that's a trend in all these series that drop the ball. Like, even Tokyo Ghoul's like, okay, we keep adding characters to the board, and then we didn't take any off the board. So the board got full and collapsed.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Berserk, however, handled its time skip perfectly because it took every piece off the board. In the most brutal way imaginable. They didn't take the pieces off the board, they flipped the table and set it on fire.
Berserk is a series that I'm probably never going to finish because I was reading it and it's like I don't know if the anime is the same, but like it starts with him meeting the little fairy, and then it goes into a flashback that just lasts the entire series.
That's the thing, is you have to treat it like a JoJo part. So if you start with the flashback and you treat it as a JoJo part, if this is a story, and then we get to the next story. And the anime never even got to the next story. Just straight up.
Well,
So
I mean, that's kind of where I stopped reading because it was like I was just like, but you promised me a story at the beginning, and then you just went and told me a completely different one.
yeah, but it's like weirdly Gurren Lagann did the same thing where it's like, okay, here's a story of how I became king of the universe, and then just never actually got back there.
Fair enough.
Now, to pivot back into horror, Uzumaki is an example of like just a blatant. Its tags are dark fantasy, psychological horror, and supernatural, where it should be.
Yeah, Uzumaki was a great manga.
And the secret to it is it let itself do its run then end.
Well, and then it also like never really explained anything. It was,
Which
like,
is so good.
This weird stuff kept happening. Like the kid he's moving too slow, and then he turns into a snail because there's spirals in a snail's shell. It's like, oh, okay.
It's like, you're gonna give me nightmares. Good job. Nightmare. If your goal is to, go ahead.
The chick who loved her hair, and then it grew long and curly and started growing too long and sucked her life force out. It's like, okay.
Yeah, the series literally was spiral into horror. Where the stories would literally spiral into horror, and then be like, oh, if you look at the spirals, bad thing will happen, as it's covered in spirals. Like, I see what you did here. So that one's like, so for things where you asked to write a horror, that was definitely like, if you're describing what you visualize horror, it would be Uzumaki.
Mm-hmm.
Where that one was just straight psychological horror, and a little out of my writing range, to be honest, because it's good. I am a good enough writer to acknowledge when things are better than me. Like, I could write Claymore. I could definitely write the story of stoic woman fights monsters to reclaim her humanity, because I wrote that. It's called The Waltz of Blades. Check it out right now. It's fantastic. But
so to bring this episode like full circle.
Full spiral. Anyway.
What was new with me is that I read the Parasyte manga, which is actually tagged as horror.
So good.
And it's like that. The aliens area, which is also kind of where we began. You have a character who has an alien something implanted into his right hand,
I'm amazed it just
and
straight
have to
up
go
stole
fight
that in the
aliens.
new Shonen Jump series, where it's like, the first page is like, I have an alien hand punch. I'm like, you stole that from a very famous manga. How did you publish this? That is very clearly a worse Parasyte. That was the one thing Parasyte was about, was the alien arm. You can't just do that, bud. But please continue.
Well, okay, like the evil right hand thing does seem to kind of be. I don't know if there's enough examples to call it a trope, but it's like idle hands, Evil Dead, Parasyte. Like there's a few examples.
Yeah, but like
of
the stretchy
that kind of
alien
body
punch
horror.
was very specifically like lifted line for line with worse artwork.
Well, like you said, like I say, it's the only redeeming chance it has of being anything is the fact that it's not going to be a horror story.
But it's almost like a missed opportunity. So I pulled up a list of what they consider to be horror manga, which after this
Okay.
discussion are almost all dark fantasy.
Hey,
Because here's what they have listed. They have Uzumaki, which is actually horror. Tokyo Ghoul, which I think was horror maybe at the start. Berserk, which is sword and sorcery dark fantasy. It is the dark fantasy. We have the
Right.
Drifting Classroom, which I don't know if you're familiar
Ooh.
with. That one's a horror.
I don't. Yeah, okay. I'll have to see if I can find that one.
We have The Promised Neverland, which stops being that after its time skip, like every other one we've mentioned.
Yeah, I think it's still kind of held together as a horror.
No,
but
the
it
demons
definitely
stopped
lost
being
a lot of
scary
its
and started
mystique.
being bros.
Yeah, that's true.
The moment your
Anyways.
demons are trying to like hope for your happy ending, you've lost it. We have Gantz. I don't know if you read Gantz.
No.
So Gantz is actually, I would almost give them that. So it starts as your anime cliche, hey, you died, so we drafted you into a survival game against aliens. But then it just horrifyingly murders you, and you don't actually have a good chance to win against the aliens, as they just kill you in horrifying ways.
Oh,
So it actually,
Gantz.
but that one's still more dark fantasy, even though it's dark fantasy sci-fi. It's Berserk, but sci-fi-y.
Okay.
And then we have Chainsaw Man, which was an action fantasy anime. I don't know why you're telling me it's horror. Chainsaw Man was not horror.
Well, I mean, the first like maybe 20 or 30 chapters were pretty.
No, the moment you pull chainsaws out of your arms to fight monsters, you can't pretend that's scary anymore. That's just awesome. It's dark, it's edgy. Nothing has tried to be as edgy as this series in a very long time. And it's like
Right.
the most edgy it can be. But it's not horror, it's just edgy. It is as edgy as listening to metal while, I don't know, drinking Fireball whiskey. You know, like, you're not actually being edgy, but it's trying so hard to be edgy. Then the next thing we have on this list is Attack on Titan.
Okay.
And then Parasyte.
Yeah.
So the things you consider horror, this list on the internet agrees with. It just didn't line up
Right.
with... It's like manga horror is very different than what cinema has been telling me is horror.
Well, I don't like. I enjoy some amount of gore, but
But
it's
Saw
kinda
is just
like,
comical at this point.
It's kind of like how you need some jokes in your series so that the serious moments hit harder. And so it's like you need some gore in your horror series so that the scary moments hit harder, right? Like
Yeah.
you can't just throw gore at every corner because then it's just you get desensitized to it. But if it's like,
But if it's just
having
suspense with
a nice
no
day-
death, then it also kills the suspense in the opposite way. You need someone to explode in a blood fountain, so you're then worried about everyone else exploding into a blood fountain.
Yeah, exactly. But you don't want everybody to explode into a blood fountain because that's just then you end up with Kingsman Secret Service.
Which was delightful for completely different reasons. I would love to write a Kingsman Secret Service movie. So,
It was delightful.
I don't know if we actually finished your thoughts on Parasyte, because I kept shifting topics so much.
No, I mean that was pretty much my I think we mentioned this before. One of the things that makes a series really great is when the author has the guts or the means to actually end it. And Parasyte only has 62 chapters?
And it tells its story, commits to it, and is done.
Yeah. And I just, like, I'm not sure where the number actually is, but somewhere between 100 and 150 chapters.
Do you have a time
never
skip?
read a series that you have a time skip, and they just lose focus, or change genres, or, like... Jujutsu Kaisen has just let me down so hard. But actually, another horror story. Well, it might not be considered a horror story, but Phantom Seer.
I am not familiar. Weird.
It's a relatively new one, but it only has 30 chapters, and it was kind of bizarre because it's about this a girl, and she attracts phantoms, and so then she ends up enlisting the help of this shaman who exorcises phantoms, and then they have to...
This one is firmly action horror, for the record. It actually just straight up has the word horror in its tags.
But they set up their 5 villains, and then they beat the first of their 5 villains, and then they're like, actually, this series is done. Final chapter.
Yeah, that's what happens when you get canceled.
I don't know why it got canceled. I thought it was really, like, interesting and fun story to read, but then, like I said, it's whet my appetite for horror, and so then I had to read, like, I was reading Tokyo Ghoul, and then Tokyo Ghoul stopped being horror, and so then I was like, you know what, I'm gonna check out this Parasyte manga, and that was definitely a good choice, because that's a classic horror story for a reason.
It's true, but that's another one that, by the end of it, it definitely pivots out of being horror. But what I enjoy is he completely murders the mid-boss, so you feel like, oh, he's becoming a shonen protagonist, and the actual boss shows up, and there's just no possible way he can win, as he's just running from this thing that's clearly stronger than him. Because, like, he gets his little power-up, he's like, okay, I've become one with my murder hand, and I killed a normal parasite, aha. Yeah, I'm made of 7 parasites, and you can't do anything. Oh, no, I can't! I'm like, wait, what? He doesn't get his hero music? He just needs to run or he's dead? Alright, you got my attention again.
Yeah. Well, and then the super parasite, like, murders the entire army in City Hall. Like, savagely. Like...
Which is fantastic.
Like, it does kind of pivot out of being horror, but at the same time, the brutality goes up, and then the parasite stops pretending to be human, and so becomes more of a monster. And it's like it's the slow descent into, like, what is a monster, what is a human. Like it's.
Like, 'cause I think the thing that really did it was they had that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like the narrative moment of either the highest high or the lowest low. And most series go with the lowest low, like Naruto watches Hinata die in front of him, and then taps into the Nine-Tailed Fox. Now in Parasyte, they went with the highest high instead of, yeah, we teamed up together and threw a rock at a parasite and sniped it, we're doing good. And then everything went worse from there, not better.
Yeah.
And I mean, it has the ending of, and then his arm went to sleep and he lived happily ever after-ish, after he was curled up in a ball crying and got lucky and stabbed the guy. Which was a very horror movie ending when your protagonist is sobbing around the corner and gets lucky.
Yeah. But the themes and ideas of Parasyte were just like, what does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be a monster? The humans become more monstrous, and the monsters become more human. And it's just like it's so good.
Yeah, it was handled very well, but when it comes down to, hey, can you write me a horror? Parasyte isn't what comes to mind simply because of my time in the movie theater and what horror movies have become. You don't get those as movies anymore. What you get is something that's basically Poltergeist, something that's basically Blair Witch Project, or something that's just murder porn. And you're not going to get the my hand is possessed by aliens as other aliens try to murder me in normal TV shows and cinema. Like, instead you get, like, Supernatural, where you have a quippy bromance shooting monsters in the face. Because they're not actually trying to, like, use suspense anymore. Horror's become distilled down to the tropes, and kind of lost a lot of its finesse. So when you told me horror, we just were not on the same page. Because it's like, you want me to write you the Blair Witch Project? Why? You want me to write you Saw? That doesn't sound like things you enjoy. You're like, no, I want you to write me Berserk with aliens. Well, why didn't you ask me for that? That sounds awesome.
But, I mean, unfortunately, you've moved on to bigger and better things, so I'm not going to get my weekly series for a while, but...
I mean, at my current rate, I'll probably be finished book 2 of my series by, September. I don't want to give my release date on this random podcast. Also, each copy of my current book my loyal listeners buy increases my motivation to finish the next one.
Mm-hmm.
But however, sir, I think we should wrap this up with our random question of the day. Week? Month?
All right.
Time slot? Okay, our random question coming in from one of our delightful listeners. If you could act in any movie, what movie would you be in?
Ooh. If you could act in any movie.
Right?
Well, I mean, despite this whole episode being about horror, I would really like to be in a fantasy movie with like some really like flashy sword fights. The first Pirates of the Caribbean had some phenomenal choreography. And that's the kind of movie I'd want to act in, is some sort of like fantasy movie that has phenomenal choreography, because that just seems like it would be so much fun to do that kind of stage work.
That's fair. So it's kind of funny the various levels of confidence on this, because you're like, yeah, no, I would just literally do kickflips in Pirates of the Caribbean. For me, I got this question. I assumed it'd be a cameo with my current acting abilities, which aren't particularly good. So I would love to be a Star Wars extra that gets lightsabered in half. Because, I mean, as hit and miss as recent Star Wars movies are, if you get lightsabered in half on Star Wars, you get to keep that with you forever. That is still one of the most iconic movies. Either that or being shot off a horse on Lord of the Rings. Like, I want to be in one of those big name ones and murdered. I want to see myself murdered gloriously in one of those cinematic sagas that are iconic and part of, like, the canon of literature. Like...
Well, I was thinking, like, with my current acting skills, I probably would actually have to be an extra, because, like, I don't know...
No, you just got this. You told me you're going to act in the next Pirate in the Caribbean, and I want to see it happen. But thank you, everybody, for tuning in. We do our various streams. I have a book for sale. Please buy it. That would be great. And thank you, everybody, for listening. And, as always, catchphrase.
Tune in next week for our podcast and more episodes of our Twitch stream.
Yeah, we totally stuck the landing. This is great. So this is why would get like the tin medal in the Olympics, which is still good because we made it to the Olympics hypothetically, but we just botched the landing so terribly. It's like, oh yeah, I did like 6 flips in the air, and then I just landed on my ankle, twisted, and fell over.